It had been a day of silly things. Katie found out that putting your shoes on the wrong feet looks really funny. Orbie learned that when mashed potatoes find their way onto the end of your nose, you look goofy. And they both discovered that a carrot crunching contest can get pretty noisy. Mom and Dad were going out for the whole day, so Grandpa and Grandma came to stay with Katie and Orbie. Grandma decided it was the perfect day to make some of her surprise brownies. Katie and Orbie wanted to take Grandpa to the park, so they all set off. Now, I have to tell you that when Grandpa is at the park, he is usually a whole lot of fun, but this day was different. After he pushed Katie on the swing and spun Orbie on the roundabout, he went over and sat on the bench. When Katie waved to him to come over, he waved back, but he didn't come. Orbie tooted that Grandpa should try the monkey bars, but he waved again and stayed on the bench. Katie and Orbie played for a while and really didn't think too much of it. However, when Grandpa didn't want to do chalk drawing on the path, they knew something was wrong. Katie climbed up on the bench beside Grandpa and gave him a big hug. Orbie crouched down in front of him. They both told Grandpa that they loved him very much. Grandpa hugged them back and told the two friends that he knew that they did. But I have to tell you, Grandpa didn't smile or anything. That made Katie and Orbie very sad. They wanted Grandpa to feel happy. Grandpa told the two friends that he was fine. He just felt a little sad today. Right before he came over, he heard that one of his friends, Bruce, was sick, and that made him feel bad. Katie swung her legs on the bench, and she told him that if he wanted to go to be with Bruce, that they'd be happy to stay with Grandma. Grandpa tousled Katie's hair and smiled. Bruce lived far away. Katie made funny eyes at Orbie. She needed to talk with him privately. She told Grandpa that if it was okay with him, she'd like to play on the monkey bars. Grandpa nodded, and Katie and Orbie took off in a flash. Now, on the monkey bars, they looked like they were playing, but in fact, they were deciding what to do. Katie knew that they couldn't take away Grandpa's worries about Bruce, but maybe they could take his mind off of it. She said she knew Orbie could be a big help because he was the silliest, funniest person she knew besides Dad. And I tell you, Orbie knew exactly what to do. Now, the first thing they tried was a really silly dance. Katie spun Orbie, and he turned so fast he looked like a spinning top. Then Katie and Orbie stuck pointed toes out like funny ballet dancers. And Orbie flipped his foot over his head and did a really silly kind of somersault. Grandpa chuckled as he watched. And when they were finished, Katie plunked herself down beside Grandpa. She put her hand on Grandpa's knee and asked him, "What's pink and gray and has 4 legs?" Grandpa thought about it for a moment. And then he told Katie he had no idea. Well, Katie got into such a fit of giggles. She couldn't speak, and hearing her giggle, Grandpa giggled too. Finally, after laughing tears were running down her face, she managed to say, "A hippo sticking his tongue out." Katie burst out laughing again. She laughed so hard she rolled right off the bench onto the grass. Grandpa laughed too. I'm not sure if he was laughing at her riddle or at her laughter. Well, just when Katie's cheeks were hurting from laughing for so long, Orbie jumped in and made it worse. He had used the colored chalk to draw a funny face in his tummy. And when he wiggled, so did his tummy face. He did some jiggle tummy dancing, and that was just too much for Katie. She climbed up on Grandpa's lap. He was chuckling at Orbie as she sat there and watched. Her laughter and Orbie's silly belly got to Grandpa big time. He just roared with laughter until tears were rolling down his face, too. Finally, Orbie stopped. His tummy was getting rather tired from jiggling. Grandpa turned to his two friends and told them they'd helped him a whole lot in two ways. Well, Katie and Orbie were thrilled, but they weren't at all sure what the two ways were. He motioned to Orbie to come and sit on the bench with him and Katie. He put his arm around Orbie, too, and he told them that their funny things had made him realize that laughing makes you feel better when you're sad. That made Katie happy. Laughter was a good thing. Grandpa said even if you're sick, laughter is really good for you. So even though he was far away from Bruce, he was going to send him laughter to make him feel better. Well, Katie and Orbie looked at Grandpa. How could you send laughter? Grandpa picked up the chalk and took both their hands. They would see. When they got home, Grandpa took some really funny pictures of Katie and Orbie doing silly dances and close-ups of Orbie's ridiculous tummy. Then they sat down with Grandma and her brownies and read jokes. Every time a joke made everybody laugh, Grandpa marked it. There was a whole lot of laughter in the house that day. Oh, and surprise brownie munching, too. When Grandpa and Grandma went home, they borrowed the joke book. He sent the pictures to Bruce, and every day he called him and read him 3 of the funniest jokes he could find. And Bruce laughed and laughed. He even sent Katie and Orbie a funny picture of himself in the hospital with a funny face painted on his nightshirt. I have to tell you that soon Bruce became well. It wasn't just because of the laughing, but the laughing really helped. From then on in, it became a family tradition. Whenever anyone was sick or sad, the others in the family would be really silly or tell jokes. And maybe one day, if someone in your family is unhappy or not feeling well, you can try to do the same thing too. I happen to know that you can be really silly too, just like Katie and Orbie.
Did you know? There are 4 different seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. In some parts of the world, the change of season means hot or cold temperatures. In other parts of the world, the weather goes from warm to hot. That just means you can go from a small fan to a really huge one.